back with another video. Remember my video with... Okay guys, my brother distracted me for a little bit. So I'm just gonna be... I think I should change my character to something more...
But back in the East, Lincoln still wanted somebody to march south and take Richmond. Having given General McClellan the boot, he needed a new man in charge. All right, Mr. President. Option 1 is General Hooker. Bit of a nutcase, but a good general. Option 2, his qualifications are his name is Burnside, and he's freaking dope-ass sideburns. Say no more. So General Burnside was put in charge of the Army of the Potomac and sent south. Lincoln hoped he finally had a general who could succeed. Burnside met General Lee at the city of Fredericksburg, where he intended to rapidly cross the river and take the city. But the Union War Department was too slow in delivering the pontoon bridges, and the two sides were forced to camp across from each other, close enough to speak. Hey Yankee, ready to get your butt kicked? Yeah, right, Rebel. God is on our side. No way, God's on our side. Oh, you think so? Well, why don't we ask him? Hey God, whose side are you on? Ow. Dude, I'm cool. With over 100,000 men.
I remember. Last week
But by now, the Confederates had amassed
kill him!
during the battle.
1, 2, 3. Oh!
Brutal Confederate onslaught. Even the Confederates couldn't believe what they were seeing, and in one moment of camaraderie, a Confederate sergeant, unable to take it, reportedly came out into the field to tend to the Union wounded. Seeing this, the Union troops held their fire. Still, Burnside and his forces
okay, I thought he was going to belly me out of
retreat. Lincoln's popularity and Northern morale continued to plummet, especially as the winter heading into 1863.
Wait, but I could actually lose this.
Were rife with disease. The food was less than appealing. On both sides, men began to leave. Hey, where do you think you're going? I'm deserted. What? Don't you love your country? Yes, I do. And I'm trying to get back to it as quick as I can. Lincoln, ever the kind and caring man he was, spent much of his time pardoning deserters' death sentences. Oh my. Here's a 17-year-old boy sentenced to be hanged. Well, I bet he suspended his sentence. Or he'll be suspended tomorrow. What? To try to keep the numbers up, both sides had introduced conscription. There was controversy in the North, however, since rich men could simply pay to have someone else fight on their behalf. Riots broke out in New York City, with enraged mobs, furious at the idea of going to fight for slaves, an idea that many of them simply did not support. However, after so much pressure,
if he can sense a strong style wrestling, and she's the referee, he did.
These men, knowing what they were fighting for, signed up. By the end of the war, nearly 200,000 troops
Handicap.
that the Union Army would be black. The valor and bravery they showed throughout, silencing critics. Okay, well that last guy was useless. Let's try this Hooker fellow. General Joseph Hooker was put in charge of the Army of the Potomac, and once again, Lincoln ordered him to move south and take Richmond. Hooker met Lee at the Battle of Chancellorsville, where Hooker had over twice the men Lee did. Lee was forced to defy all military convention and split his smaller force into two. Lee had absolutely no chance of winning, and Lee won. It was his masterpiece. Lee did suffer one significant loss during the battle, though. As his right-hand man, Stonewall Jackson, was riding back to the Confederate lines at night, the nervous Confederate troops, unable to recognize him, opened fire. You boys done goofed up. Jackson died 8 days later. As for Lincoln, he couldn't believe it. It was yet another loss, and Northern support continued to waver. The Union kept on struggling in the East. Out west, unconditional surrender Grant was making moves as always. In an attempt to take Vicksburg on the Mississippi, he made a series of risky and bold movements. He sent a cavalry raid and deigned Sherman north to confuse the enemy. Then, aided by a fleet of ironclads on the river, he raced his army south to cross the Mississippi. Aware that the terrain to the north was restricted, instead, he strategically moved northeast, hitting Vicksburg's supply line and defending his rear from Confederate armies in Jackson.
I think I've done good. Okay, hopefully I'm not the guy getting...
During which time,
heck no, wait a minute.
Despite not taking the city, Lincoln loved it and encouraged Grant to hold firm. It would only be a matter of time before the Mississippi was in Union hands. Around this time, the people in the west of Virginia, who had remained loyal to the Union throughout, finally broke away to form their own state. They could have named it anything in the world, but the creative minds at the time came up with the ingenious West broke away to form their own state. They could have named it Anything in the world but the creative minds at the time came up with the ingenious West Virginia. Back in Washington, Lincoln once again was to take command. Oh my goodness, why do all these 19th century generals look so bust? Look, we got Sleepy Eyes Joe here. That's Princess Leia with a mustache. E.T. from the Doctor. Fine, why don't we give Snapping Turtle McGee here a shot? So General Snapping Turtle McGee was put in charge of the Army of the Potomac, and it was a crucial time for the Union, because once again, the Confederates decided to go on the attack. So far, they had done exceedingly well militarily, but as the war kept going, the Confederate economy was
Oh, come
broke out in
on.
the streets of Richmond as the price of bread skyrocketed. Supplies were dwindling. Jefferson Davis wanted to send men west to rescue Vicksburg, but General Lee knew the longer the war lasted, the worse their chances got. And he still hoped if he could just threaten D.C., the already demoralized North would surrender. So in June 1863, with the momentum behind him, General Lee once again entered the North, fighting his way through Maryland and into Pennsylvania. General Lee set out to meet him for what would be the most significant battle of the entire war. If the Confederates
Choke
won,
slam!
D.C. could fall. If the Union won, it would be a turning point, as the Confederates would run out of steam, and the small town that was to get caught up in the crossfire of the largest battle in American history.
I won!
Pennsylvania. On June 1st,
You know
units
what?
from each army encountered one another and
Let's
skirmished
form a
through the
team,
town itself.
boys.
The townspeople were forced to take refuge, except for one man, who reportedly ran outside for a strange reason. Joseph, what are you doing? I'm not gonna let them take my beans. How many times do I have to tell you?
Yep.
They're not here for your beans. By the second day, over 100,000 men stretched for miles across the battlefield. Lee took the initiative, deciding to hit the enemy's flanks, and he came very close to breaking the Union.
No dog.
But Union Colonel Joshua Chambers ordered
Pete
a desperate bayonet
Madison.
charge,
Oh, Matt
smashing into the
Riddle.
Confederates and forcing them back. The Union forces held
Cool.
across the line.
Lucy
On
Lake.
the final day, Lee believed
Cool
the Union Army had
Capalmo?
fortified its flanks,
Wow.
so he decided to finish them off with
Amazing.
one massive central assault.
Fresh
The Confederates
Cougar.
rushed at the Union lines during
Vendetta.
General Pickett's charge, and this time, it was the Union's turn to unleash hell. Meade had correctly guessed Lee's strategy, and the Confederates were decimated, forced to turn and flee. A devastated General Lee called out to his fleeing and wounded men, telling them it was his fault. And after holding for a counterattack that never came, he ordered a retreat back into Virginia. The North had just managed to score a massive victory, and one they desperately needed. And if that wasn't enough, in the West, after a month-long siege, Vicksburg finally fell. The North now held the Mississippi. And better yet,
Spear.
it was the 4th of July. With control of the Mississippi, Union forces moved.
Belly to belly.
Tennessee in particular saw heavy fighting, with Union General Rosecrans masterfully pushing Braxton Bragg's Army of the Tennessee out of Tennessee. He suffered a major setback, however, at the bloody Battle of Chickamauga, and ended up under a Confederate siege at Chattanooga. At one point during the siege, a temporary truce was declared so that wounded men could be recovered. And often in the Civil War, during these small